Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to Assistant Secretary-General Simonovic for his briefing. This meeting today of the Council follows the National Day of Mourning in Australia yesterday, when all Australians remembered those who died when Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 was shot down over separatist-held territory in eastern Ukraine. That deplorable crime, unanimously condemned by this Council, is a reminder of the terrible consequences of the violence in eastern Ukraine and the deliberate actions of armed separatist groups. It's a reminder to all those who stake the flames of division that fueling violence has widespread, devastating and often unpredictable consequences. In the days immediately following the adoption of Resolution 2166, an international mission for the protection of the investigation was established, led by the Netherlands with Australian and Malaysian participation. Despite separatists' intimidation and frequent restrictions from them on access to the crash site, this unarmed mission accessed the site on a number of occasions, locating and recovering human remains and personal effects and recovering evidence. We worked swiftly and thoroughly through those areas of highest priority, and the mission has now concluded the substantive part of its work at the site at this stage. On Wednesday, the Netherlands announced the withdrawal of the mission from the site. When search and security conditions improve, we will return to the site to ensure that we've recovered all identifiable remains. The investigation into the cause of the crash will, of course, continue, led by the Dutch Safety Board with input from ICAO and other international partners. As with the parallel investigation into possible criminal responsibility for the downing of MH17. This is again an international effort coordinated by the Dutch. The results of these investigations will be crucial elements towards ensuring accountability as demanded by Resolution 2166, and it's imperative that all states cooperate fully with those efforts. Mr. President, we're very concerned by what the fourth report on Ukraine by the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and Assistant Secretary-General Simonovic today have reported. The report tells us two stories. In most of Ukraine, under government control, the government has taken steps towards constitutional and political reform, including protection of minority rights, and there has been some movement towards accountability. Judicial reform too has commenced, although that needs much more work. These steps are as yet incomplete, as we know, but they are in the right direction. Conversely, the report paints a dire picture of the human rights situation in separatist-held parts of Ukraine: abductions, torture and extrajudicial killings by armed groups, increasing numbers of civilians killed, deliberate targeting by armed groups of critical public utilities such as water, electricity, sewerage, and growing numbers of internally displaced people. These illegal armed groups have seized Ukrainian territory through violent means and, I quote from the report, inflicted on the populations a reign of intimidation and terror to maintain their position of control. These groups have no legitimacy. Their actions have had terrible consequences. In separatist-controlled areas, as the report says, the rule of law has disappeared and been replaced by the rule of violence. This is now the fourth occasion where the Council has received a UN report documenting these human rights abuses. The pattern has continued, and in some places under separatist control, it has of course worsened significantly. Those responsible for these violations have acted with impunity. This cannot continue. They will be held accountable for their crimes. Mr. President, no country can accept illegally armed insurgents taking control of parts of its territory. In these circumstances of continued destabilisation and use of force by separatists, Ukrainian authorities have the right to protect their own citizens and reassert control over their sovereign territory. They must, of course, do so in a manner proportionate to the circumstances, and all parties must comply with international humanitarian law. It is self-evident that the human rights and humanitarian situation in eastern Ukraine will only improve with an end to the conflict. This requires separatist groups to lay down their arms and cease using violence against the Ukrainian state. It also requires Russia to stop its provocation and destabilisation of eastern Ukraine and to use its considerable influence over the separatists to de-escalate the situation. But Russia has not done so. Russia has not taken action to control its borders. Weapons and fighters continue to flow from Russia into eastern Ukraine, fueling the conflict, and the build-up of Russian troops along the Ukrainian border, the Russian military exercises in the area, the rapid deployment of new and sophisticated military capabilities only add to the destabilisation of eastern Ukraine. Serious concerns about Russian military preparedness, what actually looks like combat readiness, are widespread among countries in the region and globally. Our concerns have been aggravated by Russia's attempts to construct a case for intervention in eastern Ukraine, a case which is fraudulent and cynically self-serving. The humanitarian problems in eastern Ukraine are a result of the instability and conflict deliberately manufactured by armed groups and supported by Russia. This has inevitably produced a worsening humanitarian situation in eastern Ukraine, but effectively one limited to areas occupied by the separatists and certainly not on the scale of what we understand to be of the magnitude of a humanitarian crisis. Russia can most usefully contribute to alleviating the situation by ending its support for separatist groups and influencing those groups to end the conflict. To conclude, Mr. President, the human rights situation, the downing of MH17 and the humanitarian plight of many are all the results of the systematic, manufactured destabilisation of eastern Ukraine. The consequences have been grave for Ukraine and its people, and now for the people of many other countries as well who have lost their citizens. This destabilisation must stop. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Australia for his statement.